Hello everyone, welcome back. If you're new here, I'm Packy, and yes, I've earned the title. Anyway, if you watched last week's Total Dismantling and Rebuild, you're overexcited to see what my design concept is, right? Well, wait no further. Here it is. And it did come with challenges of its own. Watch the video to see how I adapted along the way. Hi, my name is Packy, creator of Packrat's Shack. I upcycle furniture, build out of pallet wood, finish interior spaces, and have a vendor booth for my creations. Welcome to my world. Here we are backpedaling a bit, but I wanted to show you that when cutting down sheets of material such as this luan, you can measure the position of your saw blade from the edge of the base plate. Then you know how far back to set your guide off from where your cut line will be. To start the actual design concept, I spray paint these back panels starting with the Rustoleum hammered bronze color. I do 2 full coats over the entire panel for solid coverage. Then I come back in with Krylon Fusion all-in-one paint of hammered cocoa brown. I'm focusing on spraying just the edges and at the corners bringing it in a little more to make an overall vignette look. So now you might be wondering why I didn't sand before spray painting. Well, when it comes to certain materials like this soft luan, the little wood fibers just tend to bend back and forth with the sanding, especially when you're not wanting to do an aggressive sand. So by painting it first, you're adding some rigidity to those little wood fibers, so when you go back to do your sanding, everything turns out nice and smooth. And those little stubborn fibers that wouldn't break off previously break off now. And here are those tiny little strips that I'm turning into gilded bronze bars. Not quite the same concept as nice heavy gold bars from a vault, but you know, it is adding a little bit of richness to this piece. So if you remember from the rebuild video, I'm using these bars to fill in the routed grooves that were where the old shelf locations used to be. I am just double hockey sticks bent to put drywall mud on this project. Okay, so the first time you saw in the rebuild was a total fail, but now this is a technique that I have used before with success. And actually, when I used it on the piece previously, it sold the first day I put it in the shop. So, is how I do this is I'm using very little water. Most of the moisture comes from the Elmer's glue and the paint pigment that I'm using. Those two products are a binding product and they provide the strength to a raised stencil after it dries. You can just keep adding some drywall a little bit at a time until you get that smooth, thick paste consistency that you want. This is a really good alternative to using sea sprays or the plaster of paradise because I don't always have those on hand, but it is very typical for me to have drywall mud on hand. You just gently scrape some of this onto your stencil so that it goes into the deep sections of the stencil. And after you get it all over the stencil where you want, you go back and you lightly smooth the surface down, removing all of the excess and trying to get it so it's not raised too high above the stencil. Wow, these are turning out so well. This makes me so happy. And I'm actually starting to see my design idea emerge. I don't want these panels to look the same, so I change up the layout on the second one. Now, I did skip showing the stencils because you've seen that before, and there are plenty of new things to show you on this piece. I added some of my antique watches and a hot air balloon off of my Dixie Bells Bells and Whistles collection. I then sanded off any loose or high pieces of my raised stencil after it was dry. Oh, now I'm in the process of creating a huge folly. It's not a video without Packy causing a problem. This stencil is just not working, and I eventually discover that it's because it's a negative and leaves too much behind. Now, what I mean by that is, yes, I already knew it was a negative, but until you actually work with it on a piece, you're not certain if that much being left behind works or not. And in this particular one, with how small it is, it's not working and it's leaving straight lines, not that random look that I would like. So it takes a bit of time to clean it all off, and then I do go ahead and seal the panels for what I've already got done because if I have another folly, I don't want to keep wearing down the race stencil that I already have on. As you can see, I'm going ahead with layering on this color of tarnished copper using the first stencil again. This works much better, giving it the look that I wanted with randomness rather than some misplaced blobs of mint green that the other stencil left behind. And I was actually going to skip showing the sanding back of these new sections after they dried, but then this happened. While I was sanding over the hot air balloon, the stencil ripped. So now that's going to take some thinking on to figure how to best overcome this new disaster that I created. First, I need to just complete what I'm doing and wipe off the residue. And then I shoot in some glue all around the edges of this tear to keep the stencil from raising further now that air can easily get behind it. I'm wondering if the polyurethane had anything to do with this, but all the rest of the transfers are fine, so that's probably not the case. I use saran wrap to push out and lift any of the excess glue. This way my fingers don't stick to the transfer, causing more damage. I then decide to go ahead and paint the error in. I have just enough and almost right colors of paints on hand, but I've already moved so many of my supplies out of the house that I'm pretty lucky I have what I need, or should I say I made what I had work well. Well, well enough, that is. Now comes the fun part, playing with gears. So here I'm using E600 to stick these into place. I have fun creating random little bunches to add yet another dimension to these panels. The placement in this one location can further obscure from that transfer damage mishap. Oh, and I almost forgot. Before I wanted to attach these gears, I really wanted to go in and use a couple different colors of gilding wax on my raised stencil gears in order to apply more color variations to the piece. I used bronze, silver, and black, but I added the black later after further reflection on the piece. Now to add some interest to the outside. We don't want the inside to be having all the fun, do we? I picked up this decoupage paper off Amazon for $11.60. It's the Timeworks design by Redesign with Redesign, not to be confused with Redesign by Prima. But I really actually liked using this decoupage paper. It really did seem easier to use than others that I've used in the past because it was a lot thicker but still had the porousness to it for the adhesion material to get through. So it didn't seem to wrinkle as much as papers that I've used in the past. But I do think in the future I need to remember to try to press all of the folded creases out first because that would just make it that much easier when applying. I'm also thinking that using a thicker adhesion medium would do better, such as Mod Podge. I did use Dixie Belle's clear satin finish because that's something that I have on hand and it had been recommended on different decoupage rice papers, so I thought it would work well. But I noticed in this particular situation that a couple days later on one panel there was a few wrinkles and some air pockets that had formed that was not there previously. I'm not sure if it's because of the porousness of the wood that I put it on. Another idea that came to me was sealing the wood and letting that dry with a medium that would not reactivate and loosen once you started putting your adhesion medium on it. Therefore, then no air pockets could come in from behind, which is a possibility of what happened here. I did go ahead and fix those issues by injecting them with glue and using some pressure and weight to hold it into place until it was completely dry. And it did seem to work well, and I'm not concerned about the overall look at this point. After those panels were sealed in with 2 coats, I left them to dry overnight, and when I returned, I sprayed the piece with shellac to seal the wood from any future possible tan and bleed through, knowing that I am using a medium tone color on the outside of the base, and I had taken all of the finish off of this piece that was previously on it. So now all of the wood cells are opened up and capable of causing some bleed through. After that was all dry, I started painting the piece. I used Dixie Belle's chalk mineral paint in pine cone. I just use a cheap chip brush in this case because it will get into all of these tiny little grooves quite well, where those big, thick, oval chalk paint brushes don't really do this so well. Also, you can see that after I get the paint onto a piece section by section, I go back and do this stippling technique. Now, one might think that this is going to add texture, but in this case, no. Since I didn't add any thickening agent to the paint, it really doesn't add texture. You can see here how nice and smooth this finish actually is in this close-up after my first coat has dried. The paint is so thin and smooth that you can still see the wood grain behind it. This technique is just one that I like to use because it keeps brush marks from being seen. Now, while I wait for that to dry, before returning for the second coat, I'm going to go ahead and continue on with these panels. I'm going to tie them in with my gilded bronze bars by gilding the entire edge with that same bronze gilding wax. Now that that's done, I can start making my plan and measuring out where I want my hardware to go for installing these panels to the piece. Bolting these in will pull the thin, wonky planks along the backside into a more flush position. This idea is actually what inspired the whole steampunk design idea. And then I install my bronze gilding bars, of course. I have to use weight to hold them in place while they dry, so I can only do one side at a time. Boy, I sure do miss my weights being on hand. I had to resort to using these bricks that I found in my garage. Now I have the hurdle of figuring out how to make this top consistent. You can definitely tell that it was a build into place piece because one side has a routed cut and the other side is flush cut. And of course, my router bit is not the same design. I tried a couple local hardware stores, but no luck, and I don't have enough time to wait for a delivery. So I decide to just cut the routed edge to be a flush cut like the other edges. Then the front edge is going to be the only routed edge. This ends up looking very well. And it's actually the best decision for this piece, even if I had the correct router bit, because while I was installing the top, there was no way of keeping the overhang consistent all the way around. So I decided to keep the front edge as consistent as possible, which meant that the two sides had a variation of about 3/16 of an inch from the front to back. I measure out and secure my guide so I can use my circular saw to straighten these two edges to the actual piece. This wouldn't have worked if those ends had been routered. You can see these hardware holes along the whole entire top. I don't know why someone would put nail holes across the top to go down into the frame in order to secure the top. But that's what they did, so now I'm going to be filling all of these holes in and a few cracks as well. This takes a couple of times in order to get them filled completely, as the nail filler usually shrinks back as it dries and leaves a pinhole in the center. So I sand in between each coat and then again after. And now it's time to make this top look good. I'm using the same technique that I used on the shelves, where I start with spraying the whole entire top with black spray paint. Then I'm going to whitewash over that. Followed by a sandcastle wash. And then a black glaze just to bring back some more of the black and have that streaking through more consistently. I don't know about you, but I just really want to add some bling to these glass boring panels. Otherwise, I just feel they'll look too bland for this piece. I've never tried this before, but this Fusion all-in-one hammered cocoa brown paint says it can be used on any surface. So let's give it a go and see how well it will stick to glass. Finally, we are to the finishing details. Just a bit more bronze gilding to the edge of all of the panel inserts. And on the hardware. Then some dark brown Dixie Belle's Best Dang Wax. And voila! What do you think? So, what did you think? I really hope you enjoyed both parts of this piece, last week's rebuild and this week's design concept. This piece was a real struggle for me and came with a lot of hurdles for me to overcome. You can check out all of the information on the supplies I used for this piece in the description below. The link for my page on the Buy Me a Coffee platform is also below. I'm currently in the process of building my first tier to this platform, and I hope to have that ready to introduce to you by the end of January or the beginning of February. Please don't forget to like my video and subscribe to my channel. And as always, until next time, stay safe out there.